The bracelet was still warm. That was the part nobody told you about death. That it didn't happen all at once. That warmth lingered in plastic and metal long after the person wearing it was gone, like the body was too stubborn to let the world forget it had been there. I know this because I was holding it. Roman Voss stood in the middle of the hospital corridor, this man who had never flinched at a gunshot, never blinked when men begged at his feet, never once let anything crack the wall he'd built around himself, and he was shaking. I watched him from the shadow of the doorway. He didn't know I was there. He didn't know I was anywhere. That was the whole point. The bracelet in his fist was white with small blue lettering. Patient ID. Room 412. The name printed on it was mine. Eli Marin. Omega. Blood type O negative. He pressed it against his mouth and made a sound I had never heard from him before. Not in 3 years of working in his house. Not in the 8 months I had secretly carried his children. Not even on the night everything fell apart and I ran. It was the sound of a man breaking. And God help me, even after everything he'd done, it almost made me step out of the shadows. Almost. Let me take you back. Because you need to understand what kind of man Roman Voss was before you can understand why watching him cry didn't automatically make me forgive him. I came to work in his mansion 3 years ago as a domestic Omega, one of the underpaid, undervalued kind that wealthy alpha families collected like furniture. I was 22, newly alone in the world after my mother's medical bills swallowed everything we had, and the Voss household paid triple the normal rate. I should have known that nothing offering triple the rate was offering it out of kindness. Roman Voss was 31, the head of the most feared organized crime family in the city, and the coldest human being I had ever encountered. Not cruel, cruelty required emotion. He was simply indifferent. To suffering. To warmth. To me. For the first year, I was invisible to him. Which was fine. Invisible was safe. It was the second year that ruined everything. It started with small things. He began to notice when I wasn't in a room. Started requesting that I specifically serve during his private dinners. One night, during a thunderstorm that knocked out the mansion's power, I found him sitting alone in the dark library, and instead of leaving like I should have, I sat down across from him and said nothing. We stayed like that for 2 hours. Just breathing. He looked at me differently after that. I told myself it didn't mean anything. That alphas like Roman didn't look at omegas like me with anything other than ownership in mind. I had rules. Careful, protective rules built from watching my mother love an alpha who left. I broke every single one of them. By the time I realized I was pregnant, I had already understood 2 devastating things. 1, I was completely in love with Roman Voss. 2, Roman Voss was engaged to someone else. Not just someone else. Elena Voss. His cousin's daughter. A pure-blood alpha from a rival family, and their union was political, sealed in agreements older than both of them. He hadn't hidden it from me. He hadn't explained it either. Because to explain it would have required acknowledging that what happened between us was real, and Roman Voss was not built for that kind of honesty. I found out about the engagement the same way the rest of his staff did, through the announcement card that appeared on every table in the mansion one Monday morning. I read it standing in the kitchen, holding a cup of tea I never drank. Then I went upstairs, packed what fit in one bag, and left. He didn't come after me. That told me everything. I spent 6 months hiding. Not dramatically, not in some remote mountain safe house. Just quietly in a small apartment across the city, working at a cafe under a different name, growing larger in a way I hid under oversized sweaters. The twins arrived early. 7 months. Both fighters from the first breath. Roman's sons in every possible way, stubborn and loud and furious at the world for making things hard. I named them Noah and Miles. Noah had Roman's dark hair and his father's exact frown. Miles had my coloring but Roman's intensity, the way he watched everything, missing nothing. Looking at them was like holding a conversation with a version of my past I hadn't fully processed yet. We were fine. Small and careful and fine. Until the accident. It was ordinary, the most devastating things always are. A slick road. A driver who ran a red light. My body between the stroller and the impact because that's what you do when you're a parent, you just do it without thinking. Noah and Miles were unharmed. I was not. Which brings me back to Roman. To the hospital corridor. To the bracelet. Someone had called him, I still don't know who. Maybe a nurse who recognized the Voss name on an emergency contact form I'd filled out during my pregnancy and never updated. Maybe the universe simply deciding it had delayed this confrontation long enough. He was still holding the bracelet when his bodyguard said something quietly near his ear. Roman went completely still. Then slowly, like a man afraid of what he might find, he turned toward the doorway where I was standing. The look on his face when he saw me, alive, upright, a bruise across my cheekbone and my arm in a sling, was not relief. It was something more complicated than relief. It was the face of a man realizing that his grief had just transformed into something he had no name for. I lifted my chin and met his eyes. "Hello, Roman." Behind me, from the room I had just stepped out of, came the sound of two small boys arguing over a television remote. His eyes moved past my shoulder. And for the first time in the 3 years I had known him, Roman Voss forgot how to breathe. He counted them. That was the first thing he did. Standing in that corridor with his world quietly collapsing around him, Roman Voss looked past my shoulder into that hospital room and counted. One small dark-haired boy. Then another. His lips moved slightly, like he was checking his own vision, making sure the number was real. His jaw tightened in a way I recognized. It was the same expression he wore when someone brought him information that rearranged everything he thought he knew, that slow, controlled recalibration happening behind his eyes while his face stayed carefully composed. Except his hands. His hands were shaking again. "Eli." His voice came out wrong. Too low. Too careful. Like he was handling something that might shatter if he spoke at full volume. "Don't," I said. Just that one word. But it carried everything: 3 years, 6 months of hiding, 2 early births in a hospital where I held both boys alone and told myself I was fine with that. It carried every morning I watched Noah frown exactly like his father and had to look away. Roman closed his mouth. Behind me, Miles had apparently won the remote control battle because the television volume jumped suddenly, and Noah's voice rose in protest. Loud, indignant, completely unbothered by the fact that his entire world was about to shift on its axis. "That's mine. I had it first. You were sleeping. I was resting my eyes." Despite everything, despite Roman standing right there dismantling my careful composure simply by existing, I felt my mouth twitch. Roman heard them. Every word. I watched him absorb their voices like a man learning a new language he already somehow recognized. "How old?" he said quietly. It wasn't quite a question. 14 months. He did the math. I watched him do it. Watched the exact moment the calculation landed and what it meant registered fully, that I had been pregnant when I left. That I had known and said nothing. That somewhere in the city, for over a year, he had been living his controlled and armored life while 2 small people who carried his blood were learning to walk without him. "You knew." Still that careful voice. But something was moving underneath it now. "Yes. When you left." "Yes, Roman." A muscle worked in his jaw. "You should have told me." The audacity of that sentence hit me somewhere between my ribs and I laughed, short and humorless. "Should I have? When exactly?" "Before or after I read your engagement announcement over my morning tea." He flinched. It was small. Most people would have missed it. I had spent 2 years studying this man's face and I didn't miss it. That situation was complicated. "My situation was also complicated," I said quietly. "I handled mine alone." A nurse appeared at the end of the corridor, glanced between us with the practiced neutrality of someone who had seen too much human drama to be surprised by any of it, and disappeared again. Roman looked at the room. Then at me. Then at the room again. "Can I?" He stopped. Started again. "I want to see them." Every protective instinct I had built over 14 months rose up at once. These were my boys. My careful, perfect, hard-won boys. I had bled for them, literally yesterday, on a wet road, and this man had no rights here, no claim, no... Noah chose that exact moment to appear in the doorway. He stood there in his small hospital gown, dark hair flattened on one side from sleeping, Roman's frown sitting perfectly on his tiny face as he looked up at the large suited stranger in the corridor. The resemblance was violent. There was no other word for it. Roman went absolutely still. Noah looked at him with the focused, assessing intensity that had been making nurses uncomfortable since birth. Then he turned to me. "Mama, who's the big man?" I opened my mouth. Closed it. Found nothing. Roman crouched down slowly, this 6'2" Mafia boss lowering himself to the eye level of a 14-month-old like it was the most natural thing he'd ever done, and looked at my son. Noah stared back, unintimidated. "I'm Roman," he said. Noah considered this seriously. "You have my face." Something crossed Roman's expression that I had no category for. It moved through him fast and he controlled it fast, but for one unguarded second it was completely visible. Wonder and grief and fury at himself all arriving simultaneously. "Yeah," Roman said softly. "I do." Miles appeared behind his brother then, smaller and slightly more cautious, peering around Noah's shoulder with my eyes and Roman's instincts. He looked at Roman. Looked at Noah. Looked at Roman again with an expression that said he was already connecting dots that most adults would have missed. He pointed one small finger at Roman. "Same," he announced simply. Noah nodded in agreement. "Same," he confirmed. I made Roman wait in the corridor while I settled the boys back down. It took 20 minutes. They were overstimulated and Noah had opinions about everything and Miles kept crawling to the door like he was trying to get back to the interesting stranger. When I came back out, I expected Roman to be on his phone. Issuing orders. Rebuilding his composure with the armor of business the way he always did when something punctured his control. Instead he was sitting on the floor. Back against the wall. Knees up. The hospital bracelet still in his hand. My bracelet which he had never put down through any of this. He looked up when I came out and for once made no effort to arrange his face into anything presentable. "I would have come," he said. "If I had known. I want you to know that. You were getting married, Roman. I would have stopped it. You didn't stop it for me when I was right in front of you." He had no answer for that. Which was the most honest thing he'd ever given me. I slid down the wall and sat beside him, not close but not far, because my legs were tired and my arm was throbbing and I was too exhausted to maintain the dignity of standing. We sat in silence for a moment. Down the corridor, a monitor beeped steadily. Someone's family was laughing softly in a room nearby. "Elena and I are not married," he said quietly. I turned to look at him. The engagement collapsed 4 months ago. His voice was flat. "Careful. Her family broke the agreement. Political reasons." He paused. I wasn't devastated. I said nothing. I didn't know what to do with that information. I had spent months building a version of reality where Roman was someone else's and that was simply the truth of the world. Having that wall removed without warning left me standing in open air. "What happens now?" I asked. Roman looked at the bracelet in his hand. Turned it over once. "Now," he said slowly, "you let me fix what I broke." I looked at him for a long moment. This man who had shattered me quietly and completely. This man who had just sat on a hospital floor because his legs apparently stopped working when he saw his sons for the first time. "That," I said carefully, "is going to take more than one conversation." "I know." He met my eyes. "I have time." From inside the room, Noah's voice rose clearly through the door. "Miles, stop. That's my bracelet. Mama said I could have it." We both looked at the door. Then, cautiously, like two people testing ice neither was sure would hold, we looked at each other. And for the first time in over a year, something very small and very fragile passed between us. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But the possibility of it. They found us on a Tuesday. I know it was Tuesday because Miles had just learned to say the word, triumphantly, repeatedly, at full volume, and Noah had spent the entire morning trying to teach him Thursday instead, purely out of competition. I was standing in the kitchen of the small safe house Roman had arranged for us, watching my sons argue about days of the week, thinking that maybe, things were going to be all right. Then Roman's head of security, a quiet man named Dex, appeared in the doorway with a look on his face that made my stomach drop. That look had a language. I had learned it living in the Voss mansion. It meant that something dangerous had just gotten closer. "Boss needs you," Dex said. Not to me. To the room. But Roman was already moving. Let me tell you what I had learned about fear in the weeks since the hospital. There were two kinds. The loud kind, the kind that arrived with sirens and screeching tires and obvious catastrophe. That kind was almost manageable because it gave you something to react to. Then there was the quiet kind. The kind that settled into a house like cold air through a gap you couldn't find. The kind that made Roman check the locks twice before bed and position his men at angles I wasn't supposed to notice. That was the kind we had been living with. After the hospital, Roman had moved us, me and the boys, out of my small apartment within 48 hours. He didn't ask. He arrived with Dex and 2 other men and a look on his face that foreclosed argument, and I was too tired and too sore and too aware of my son's vulnerability to fight him on it. The safe house was not what I expected. Not a cold fortress. It was warm, someone had made sure of that. Plants on the windowsill. A small yard where Noah immediately attempted to eat dirt. Rooms that felt like someone had tried to make them feel like home rather than a holding location. I didn't ask who had arranged the plants. I was afraid the answer would do something inconvenient to my feelings. Roman came every day. Sometimes for an hour. Sometimes for the whole evening, sitting on the floor of the boys' room while Noah climbed on him with the fearless confidence of someone who had decided a person was trustworthy and saw no reason to revisit that assessment. Miles took longer, watching from a careful distance, which he had inherited from me, the habit of measuring before trusting. The morning Miles climbed into Roman's lap on his own and fell asleep there. Roman looked up at me across the room with an expression so undefended that I had to find something urgent to do in the kitchen. We were not together. I want to be clear about that. We were 2 people in an unresolved situation, moving around each other carefully, occasionally saying something real and then retreating from it. He hadn't kissed me. Hadn't pushed. For a man who controlled everything in his world with an iron grip, his restraint with me was almost disorienting. Once, late in the evening when the boys were asleep, he said, quietly, to his coffee cup more than to me, "I know I don't deserve fast." I didn't answer, but I stopped moving toward the door. That was as close to progress as we had gotten. Until Tuesday. His name was Victor Shin. Roman told me that evening, sitting across the kitchen table from me with his hands flat on the surface, the posture he used when he was controlling himself very deliberately. Victor Shin was the head of a rival organization. Younger than Roman, hungrier, and apparently laboring under the impression that the best way to destabilize the Voss Empire was not through business or territory but through something more personal. "He knows about the boys," Roman said. The kitchen went very quiet. "How?" Someone talked. His voice was even. The evenness was more frightening than anger would have been. "It's been handled." "Roman. Eli." He looked at me directly. "I need you to hear me clearly right now. Nothing is going to happen to Noah and Miles. That is not a possibility I will allow to exist. You can't just decide that danger isn't. Watch me." It was said without arrogance. Just absolute certainty. The certainty of a man who had built an empire on making impossible things happen through sheer refusal to accept any other outcome. I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell him that certainty wasn't armor, that love wasn't bulletproof, that I had learned, expensively, that wanting something to be safe didn't make it safe. But my boys were asleep down the hall. And the man sitting across from me had positioned 12 of his best people around this house without being asked. "What does he want?" I said instead. Roman was quiet for a moment. "He wants to use them to get to me." The word "them" landed in my chest like something physical. "What does that mean specifically?" "It means he's made a threat." Roman's jaw worked. "A specific one. A timeline." "How long?" 72 hours. I stared at him. "Roman, that's..." "I know. That's 3 days. I know, Eli. What are you going to do?" He looked at me steadily. And in that look was everything he wasn't saying. The machinery already in motion, the calls already made, the weight of what he was carrying and had been carrying alone because that was what he did, what he had always done, absorbed everything so that the people near him didn't have to. Except I wasn't sure that was still a system I could accept. Not with my sons in the middle of it. "Tell me," I said quietly. "Not the protected version. Tell me what's actually happening." Something shifted in his face. Like a door opening that he usually kept bolted. "Victor doesn't just want leverage," he said. "He wants the twins specifically. As heirs. There's a tradition in some of these older organizations. Taking an enemy's bloodline. Raising them inside your own structure." His voice stayed level but his knuckles whitened against the table. "He thinks if he has my sons, he has a future claim on everything I've built." The room tilted slightly. "He wants to take them," I said, "and raise them as his. He wants to try." I stood up, sat down again because my legs weren't cooperating. "Roman, they're 14 months old. They're babies. They don't. Noah still needs his specific blanket or he won't sleep. Miles is afraid of the vacuum cleaner. I know. His voice cracked slightly on those two words. Just slightly. He caught it and steadied immediately, but I heard it. Eli, I know. I pressed my hands flat on the table and focused on breathing. So what do we do? And he said something then that I genuinely didn't expect from Roman Voss, this man who solved every problem alone, who had never in my knowledge asked anyone for anything. I need your help, he said. I can control the external threat. I have people, resources, I can handle Victor. He paused. But I need you to trust me. Completely. For the next 72 hours, I need you to do exactly what I tell you when I tell you, without the 30 seconds of arguing you do when you think I'm being controlling. Despite everything, despite the terror sitting in my throat, I felt something almost like a laugh move through me. 20 seconds, I said. I can give you 20 seconds. He looked at me. And for the first time in weeks, in the middle of all of this, the danger, the unresolved everything between us, the 72-hour countdown on our children's safety, Roman Voss almost smiled. 20 seconds, he agreed. But then Dex appeared in the doorway again. And this time the look on his face was worse than before. Boss. His voice was tight. The east perimeter. We have movement. Roman was on his feet before Dex finished the sentence. He looked at me once, sharp, direct. Get the boys, he said. Right now. I was already moving. I heard the first shot from Noah's bedroom. Not close, somewhere beyond the east wall, muffled by distance and the thick safe house construction, but my body didn't wait for my brain to process the geography. I was across the room and lifting Noah before the sound fully registered, tucking him against my chest with my good arm while he made a startled sound against my shoulder. Miles was already awake. He was sitting up in his small bed with Roman's exact expression, that still, watchful alertness that didn't panic, just assessed. 14 months old and already reading rooms the way his father did. It would have made me proud on any other night. Up, I whispered. Arms up, baby. He lifted both arms immediately. No argument. Something in my voice had communicated what words hadn't, and Miles, my careful, perceptive Miles, understood that this was not the moment for questions. I held both of them against me and moved to the corner Roman had shown me 3 days ago. Not a closet. Not obvious. A reinforced panel behind the dresser that opened into a narrow corridor, barely wide enough for an adult with 2 children, that ran along the interior wall and connected to a room on the opposite side of the house. If anything happens, Roman had said, showing me the mechanism, you go here. You don't wait for me. You don't look for me. You go. I had argued for 30 seconds exactly. Then I had memorized every step of the route. The corridor was dark and smelled like concrete, and I moved through it with one boy on each hip and my heart in my throat, counting steps the way Roman had taught me. Noah had gone very quiet, that particular silence he produced when he sensed that noise was dangerous. Miles had his face pressed against my neck and I could feel him breathing, steady and deliberate, like he was consciously choosing calm. Both of them trusting me completely. That trust was the most terrifying and clarifying thing I had ever felt. I reached the end of the corridor. The mechanism on this side was a simple latch. Roman had made me practice it in the dark twice, which I had found excessive at the time and was now deeply grateful for. I eased it open and slipped into the room beyond. It was Roman's operations room. Monitors. Equipment I didn't have names for. And sitting in the corner, already there, already waiting, was Dex, with 2 other men I recognized from the outer security detail. They looked up when I entered. Mrs. Dex stopped himself. Eli. You made it fast. Where is he? I said immediately. Handling the East situation. That's not an answer. Dex looked at me with something that might have been respect. He's outside. He's with 8 men. The East movement was a feint, 2 of Victor's scouts, not an assault team. Boss identified it quickly. A feint, I repeated. The word sat badly. Which means the real approach is somewhere else. Dex said nothing, which was its own answer. I set the boys down carefully. Noah immediately grabbed my leg and Miles sat very close to my feet, and the 3 of us existed in that small radius together while my mind worked through what Dex wasn't saying. A feint meant Victor was smarter than a direct assault. A feint meant he wanted Roman's attention, and firepower pulled east while something else moved from a different direction. The monitors flickered. Every screen in the room went to static simultaneously. The two guards were on their feet instantly. Dex had his phone to his ear. The room shifted from tense to a different quality of tense, the kind that preceded something rather than responding to it. "Dex," I said carefully. "The cameras just went down." "I see that. All of them." "I see that, Eli." Noah pressed harder against my leg. Miles stood up and took my hand with both of his, not crying, not making a sound, just holding on. And then the door at the far end of the room opened. Victor Shen was not what I expected. I had constructed a version of him from Roman's description and my own fear, something large and obviously menacing, something that looked like the threat it was. What walked through the door instead was a man who appeared almost ordinary. Medium height. A quiet face with watchful eyes that moved across the room in the same methodical way Roman's did, cataloging, calculating, deciding. He had two men behind him, both armed. Dex and his men had weapons raised within a second. Standoff established in the time it took to exhale. Victor looked at the guns with complete indifference. Then he looked at me. Then he looked down. At Noah and Miles. Something moved across his face that I cannot fully describe, not warmth, but recognition. Like a man seeing an asset he had been anticipating for a long time. "You must be Eli," he said. His voice was conversational. That was the most frightening thing about it. I said nothing. I put myself slightly in front of the boys, a movement so automatic I didn't decide to make it. "I want you to know," Victor continued, "that I have no interest in harming you. Or the children." What I told Roman was, let's call it a negotiating position. A way of getting his attention. "You have it," I said. My voice came out steadier than I deserved credit for. "Indeed." He tilted his head. "What I actually want is simpler. Roman Voss hands over the Northern Territory contracts. Signs them over completely. In exchange, his family, a small gesture toward the boys, lives quietly and well. You should tell him that yourself." "I intend to." Victor smiled slightly. "But I find that Roman makes better decisions when the people he loves are present for the conversation. He tends to think more clearly about what he actually values." The word loves landed strangely. I didn't have time to examine it. "So we're leverage," I said. "Your motivation," he corrected. Almost politely. Miles tugged my hand. I looked down and he was looking up at me with an expression of complete seriousness, that Roman Voss focus, that absolute attention. He was listening to everything, understanding more than a 14-month-old should have been able to. He pointed at Victor. "Bad man," he said clearly. The room went very still. Victor stared at Miles. Then the corner of his mouth moved in something that wasn't quite a smile. "Perceptive child." "He gets it from his father," I said. And right on cue, as if the sentence had summoned him, the window behind Victor's left shoulder exploded inward. Roman came through it like something inevitable. Later I would think about the physics of what he did, the calculation required, the positioning, the precise controlled violence of a man who had spent 30 years making impossible things happen by simply refusing to accept the alternative. Later I would think about what it meant that he had let Victor find us, had allowed the feint to play out, had tracked the real approach and gotten ahead of it. In the moment I didn't think about any of that. In the moment I grabbed both boys off the floor and turned my back to the room and covered them with my body and waited. It was over in less than 2 minutes. I know because I counted. Somewhere around 90 seconds the sounds stopped. The shouting, the crashing, the sharp efficient violence of Roman and his men, and the room went quiet in a way that felt different from the tense quiet before. Then Roman's hand touched my shoulder. "Eli." I turned around. Victor Shen was on the floor, contained, 2 of Roman's men holding him with a professionalism that made it clear this was a temporary situation with a longer resolution coming later. The 2 men who had come with him were similarly managed. Roman was standing in front of me. A cut above his eyebrow. His jacket destroyed. Otherwise whole. He looked at me. Then at the boys. Then he did something I had never seen him do in 3 years. He pulled all 3 of us against him at once. Me and Noah and Miles, wrapping his arms around us with a completeness that left no gap, no careful distance, no space for the measured restraint he had been practicing for weeks. Noah immediately grabbed a fistful of Roman's shirt. Miles made a small sound of contentment and closed his eyes. And I, after everything, after all of it, let myself lean into him. Just for a moment. Just long enough to feel that he was real and present and that we were all still here. 20 seconds, I said into his shoulder. That's all you're getting for the emotional moment. Then I'm going to be furious at you for using us as bait. His arms tightened slightly. 19. 18. Roman. You're all safe, he said quietly, into my hair. Like that was the only sentence that mattered. I told you I wouldn't allow anything else. I pulled back enough to look at him. This man who had broken me and come back. Who had sat on a hospital floor. Who had come through a window rather than let anything happen to his sons. What happens now? I asked. The same question I had asked him in the hospital corridor. But it meant something different this time. Roman looked at me steadily. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and produced something small. The hospital bracelet. Still with him. Still kept. He turned it over in his fingers once. Now, he said, I ask you something I should have asked a long time ago. He paused. And you're allowed the full 30 seconds to argue before you answer. Noah looked up between us with Roman's frown and my patience. Just say yes, Mama, he said seriously. The big man makes good eggs. Miles nodded in solemn agreement. Roman's expression broke open, completely, helplessly, into the most unguarded thing I had ever seen on his face. And standing there in the wreckage of a safe house with our sons between us and everything still imperfect and unfinished and real, I felt something I had protected myself against for over a year finally move through me without resistance. I laughed. Properly. For the first time in a very long time. I said, looking at Roman. At the bracelet. At the life assembled messily and miraculously in front of me. Fine. But I want it in writing. Roman Voss smiled. And it turned out, just as I had always quietly suspected, that it was the most devastating thing about him.